All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us today. So we have a special guest and exciting topic here for today's session. So I'm Arash Aghajani. I'm a Microsoft MVP and community leader from Vancouver, Canada. So today I'm going to host our session, and I'm leading the Power Platform Learner to Leader. So as you know, we change our community name from the Power Platform Zero to Hero to Learner to Leader based on the feedback that we receive from our community. So currently we are going to host our session and our learning room based on the new name and the new logo, as you see here. So we line up for session for the July. So today we have a special guest and speaker, Nathan Rose. He is Microsoft MVP and lead consultant from Capgemini, and he is living in New Zealand. And it's our pleasure that we have Nathan today in our session. So first of all, I'm going to introduce a little about the Microsoft Learn and Microsoft and our community. So the Microsoft Learn actually in Microsoft Learn, in addition to information and educational content, there are also a great tech community. The Microsoft Learn community is a platform where learners can network with experts, access updates and discussion via the Learn Hub, and enhance the skills through interactive learning rooms in a diverse and inclusive settings. So we have so many learning room. Actually, it's a part of the Microsoft Tech community. So you can search for the Microsoft Learning Room directory through the Google, and you will get the list of the learning room. So you can join to one of the learning room based on your skill set, your interesting, and there are different type of the category from the Azure to Power Platform, to Microsoft. All is around the Microsoft Cloud technology, AI, and something like this. So also the Power Platform Learner to Leader is one of the Microsoft learning room, which has more than 2,000 members. We are sharing the latest information about the Power Platform in our learning room. So if you if you are not a member of our tech community, join from this link. It's aka.ms/PPLTL, Power Platform Learner to Leader. So you can join to our Microsoft Learning Room. So here is our code of conduct. So we empower people worldwide by sharing knowledge and events, and like Power Platform Learner to Leader community, we respect everyone's diversity and dignity and expect the same from you. Please follow these standards and help us create a safe and welcoming space. Okay, so before we begin, a few important notes here. If you have any question during the presentation, feel free to type them in the chat box. We will have a dedicated Q&A session towards at the end. It's around 5 to 10 minutes. So we are live in 3 platforms right now: StreamYard, LinkedIn and the YouTube, and you can put your question in the chat box for this platform. And this session also is being recorded for those who couldn't join us live, and we will be available shortly in Power Platform, and it will be available shortly in Power Platform Learner to Leader YouTube channel. Okay, awesome. So without any delay, I will hand it over to you and Nathan to start your presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today. And this is your, let me share your presentation here. Okay.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Arash.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. Kia ora. Welcome to PowerFX to the People, where we are going to do a survey of my love language, Microsoft's PowerFX, and all of the different places that you can use it in the Power Platform. So thank you so much for coming along to this session today. I am absolutely thrilled to have this opportunity to share with you all, and am really looking forward to our time together. So as we kick off, you might be surprised to know that when the Wright brothers first invented powered flight in the early 1900s, no one cared. Now this blows our minds, right? Because in our context today, we see a world that has been completely transformed by the fact that we can get from one side of it to the other within 24 hours. And yet, when the Wright brothers first took to the skies in the early 1900s, the response was, nah, shrugs. Why would anybody want to do that? Or maybe this is something rich people might do someday, but why on earth would anyone want to do this? However, before we get too judgmental of the response to flight, we need to understand that the early 1900s were a heady time in terms of technological and societal breakthroughs. You see, powered flight was competing with a number of things for the people's attention. Firstly, we had the electrification of our cities. Suddenly, life didn't end when the sun went down. We had modern conveniences and appliances and things that suddenly could be run on electricity, and this was changing people's lives. Furthermore, we had radio communications, which was the dawn of the mass communications age we have today. Suddenly, voice could be transmitted across long distances in near real time. This was a big deal. Communication was becoming efficient. Thirdly, we had the invention of the automobile, and suddenly distances between cities and towns was shrunk, and you could get from one place to another very quickly. Furthermore, people were getting autonomy and independence in their lives by way of the automobile. Mass production ensured that suddenly we had abundance of consumer goods. We had more things cheaper than ever before. And then lastly, public health and vaccinations ensured that childhood illnesses and things that shortened people's lives and their quality and diminished their quality of life became widely available. And so in this context, we can start to see how people might have, how the innovation that is flight was lost in the shuffle. And yet, within a few short decades, commercial aviation had shrunk the globe, and we can now get from one side of planet Earth to the other within 24 hours at the most. And we had reached for the stars and set foot on the moon. And so I want you to keep this idea in the back of your mind as we're going through our time together today, because we'll come full circle on it, that sometimes world-altering technology slips under the radar and gets lost in the shuffle amongst other innovations. Kia ora everyone, I'm Nathan Rose. As Arash said, I am a lead consultant at Capgemini based here in beautiful Auckland, New Zealand. I am also a Microsoft MVP in business applications, And I've kind of become the PowerFX guy over the last couple of years. I have really dived deep on PowerFX. It is most definitely my love language, and I am incredibly passionate about evangelizing PowerFX in the community and empowering you via the Power Platform. Now, a quick overview of our time together today. So I'm going to start by making the case for PowerFX, why this is such a big deal, why I won't shut up about it, and why I think you should care about it. Next, we'll get hands-on with a demo. Now, this used to be fairly targeted, but in the last 6 months, PowerFX has absolutely proliferated across the Power Platform at a blistering rate. And so we're going to do a relatively quick survey of all these areas where PowerFX can be used on the Power Platform. Now, just as a quick note, we won't touch on Canvas apps or custom pages, as they're fairly well understood and have been in GA for a long time, but we will touch on modern commanding, formula columns, low-code plugins, the command line interface, Copilot, and Power Pages. And then lastly, we'll wrap this all up with where it's going and what this means for you, depending on your role. So whether you are a maker, a consultant, or a pro code developer. Now, I love for these sessions to be as interactive as possible, so if at any point in time you have a question or a comment, something you don't understand or something you don't agree with, feel free to pop it in the chat. I will keep an eye on it as I'm presenting, and we'll address any questions or comments as they come up. All right, we are ready to kick off. So first things first, what is PowerFX? PowerFX is Microsoft's low-code formula-based language that is used to customize the Power Platform. Now, it has some unique characteristics. It is open source. It is comprised of human-friendly commands that can be used by everyone from makers to consultants to pro devs. It's strong typed and declarative. Now, if you don't know what these terms mean or you've never heard them before, don't worry, we're going to get into this shortly. But these are the keys that make it such a big deal. It is always live, and the idea is that it pretty much works like Excel. So if you are familiar with creating formulas and functions in Microsoft Excel, then you pretty much know how PowerFX works. Now, it can be used across the Power Platform. It has absolutely grown at a blistering rate in the last few months. Now, it started life in Canvas apps, so if you have worked with Canvas apps on the Power Platform, then you should have some level of familiarity with PowerFX, because that's the language that you use to customize it. It then moved into custom pages in the model-driven app and modern commanding a couple of years ago. So these are all features that are GA and have been for some time. And then about a year ago, PowerFX started moving into Dataverse. We got calculated columns. This is a feature that went GA sometime in the last 12 months. And then last year, low-code plugins were announced at Build. And this gives us the ability to create synchronous business logic in Dataverse without having to write C# code. We also got the command line interface. We'll get into that in a bit. And then it has grown exponentially into Power Automate Desktop, Power Pages, and Copilot Studio. So these are all the places where PowerFX can be used on the Power Platform to customize it today. So it has absolutely exploded in terms of all the places it can be used. But let's get into some of the characteristics that make PowerFX so special and why it is such a big deal. So firstly, it's open source. Now, if you've worked in the Microsoft community for any amount of time, you might be a bit shocked. Open source from Microsoft? Up until about 10 years ago, Microsoft was an anything but open source type of organization. However, when Satya Nadella became CEO, he really began to embrace the open source movement. And as a result, PowerFX has been developed as an open source technology. You can download the source code on GitHub. You can work with it yourself. This means that we get faster development of new functions and features in PowerFX as the community can support them, and the same for bug fixes. So you can Again, you can download the code, create a fork, and submit it to the PowerFX team at Microsoft for approval. Furthermore, let's say you have a super esoteric function that you need PowerFX to do. You can download it into your own environment and create your own functions. So this really makes it quite a versatile development language. And as the quote on the screen says here from Linus Torvald, the creator of Linux, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So that's one of the huge advantages of open source software. So PowerFX is open source. But what about those terms that you might not understand if you're a maker or a functional consultant? Strong typed, what is that and why does it matter? Well, effectively, Microsoft have built the guardrails and the training wheels into the authoring experience. So when you're writing out your PowerFX functions and expressions, it is looking over your shoulder and making sure you're not doing things that will cause easily avoidable errors at runtime. So the classic example is if you are trying to add a number and a string field together. Now, in traditional development languages, as long as your grammar and syntax are correct, you'll be allowed to compile and run that code. And depending on the application you're working in, you will either get a nasty error because the application will say, I don't know what to do with an integer and a string field, or it will assume that you want to concatenate them and just mash them together. However, PowerFX tries to look ahead and say, no, you need to have two types of data of the same type before I will run the expression. And so that's what strong typed means. Those guardrails and training wheels are in place to ensure that you don't make easily avoidable errors. This makes pro devs more efficient, and for makers and functionals who may have never done these types of things before, it means that you can very quickly pick it up and become productive with it. So that's strong typed and why it matters. What about declarative? Again, if you're a maker or a consultant, you may have never heard this term before. And effectively, software languages can be imperative or declarative. So we'll start first with imperative. Most of the traditional languages are imperative by nature. And what this means is that when you want it to run a function, you need to tell it how to run the function. You need to give it all the steps involved. So say, for example, I wanted a hamburger. I wanted a Big Mac. Well, I can't just ask for the Big Mac. I have to go through the recipe and 2 beef patties, special sauce and cheese, all on a sesame seed bun. So now that we've all got the jingle stuck in our head and are all craving a Big Mac from McDonald's, you understand how an imperative language works. Now, this gives you a great deal of control over how that function runs, but the problem is you can get some messy code as you need to go through these steps every single time you want a Big Mac in your code. Furthermore, if you are a maker or a functional consultant, this creates a barrier to entry. It makes it much harder for you to pick up the language and start being productive with it. PowerFX, by contrast, is declarative. What this means is we simply tell it what we want it to do. So if we want a Big Mac, we roll up to the drive-thru, we ask for the Big Mac, and we move on. We don't care what's going on behind the scenes. PowerFX is figuring that out. So when I call the Big Mac function, PowerFX in the background goes through 2 beef patties, special sauce, and cheese, but I don't care about that because all I have in my code is Big Mac. And so that is how a declarative language works. And again, this is all designed to make life easier for people who have never used it before, who aren't traditional software developers, to pick it up and become productive right away. Lastly, PowerFX is always live. So this means you can instantly see the impact and the effects of your functions as you type them in to whichever app or automation that you're working with in the Power Platform. Now, traditional software languages need to be written, so you write your code, you compile your code, and then you run your code. So you often won't see any issues until runtime, whereas in PowerFX, you see it right away. This means that you can correct any issues or errors or things where it's not quite doing what you would expect it to do, and it makes it easier and faster to learn because those feedback loops are being shortened. You instantly see what it's doing when you create your function. This is designed to work exactly like an Excel spreadsheet. So if you are familiar with Excel, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Whenever you create a function in Excel, you instantly see it recalculate and the results of it. And PowerFX is designed to work exactly the same way. So those are the four characteristics that make PowerFX so special. It is open source, it's strong typed, it's declarative, and it's always live. But you might be saying, that's great, Nathan, but why should I care about this? Why is this such a big deal? Well, in order to answer this question, I'm going to butcher a quote by our old friend Bill Shakespeare and say, now is the winter of our app shortage. So we have a global shortage of software developers that is tipped to reach into the tens of millions by 2030. Now, that's not that far in the future. That's 5.5 years from now. And the shortage of software developers is causing a problem. Now, for you and I who work in the technology space, this might feel like a pretty good thing because it means we've got job security, we can command decent salaries. But the reality is that we are being held back as companies, as countries, as citizens of planet Earth, simply because we can't get all the software we need to do the things we want to do. The shortage of software developers lengthens development cycles, reduces quality, raises costs, and stifles innovation. We are basically being held back because of this shortage of software developers. Now, this shortage reminds me of someone I learned about back in school. You may be familiar with an individual by the name of Thomas Malthus. You might have learned about them in history or economics class back when you were in school. He was an economist back at the start of the Industrial Revolution in the UK. And he is most famous for predicting that we were all going to starve to death. Now, the fact that we are all here in this call at this moment, some of us with ample waistlines, is proof in the pudding that Malthus was wrong. You see, he didn't account for innovation in his model. In his model, which you can see here on the screen, he noticed an exponential uptick in population growth with only a logarithmic growth in the resources in food production. And so he assumed that this would continue on into the future, and eventually population would so far outstrip food resources, everyone would starve to death. However, he didn't account for innovation in his model. You see, Malthus lived right at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, a time when we saw tremendous growth and development in science, in industry, in agriculture. We developed new ways to fertilize and prevent pests in our crops, and as a result, food production has skyrocketed, and Malthus didn't account for that in his model. So he's most famous for being wrong. But just because he was wrong doesn't mean that we can't make use of his model. As W. Edwards Deming once said, all models are wrong, some are useful. And so what I've done is I've taken Malthus's model and I have substituted the apps that we need for the population and the available software developers for resources. So the apps and software that we need have far outstripped the number of available software developers. Now, we can debate where we are specifically along this curve, how far past the point of crisis we are, but I think we can all agree that we need a lot more apps than we have people available to build them. Now, this is simultaneously a crisis and an opportunity. And some clever people at Microsoft got to thinking and said, you know what? Excel is often used as a pseudo business application. People use it not just to crank numbers, but to do all kinds of things when they probably should be using a database, but they do some pretty cool stuff in Excel. And we have billions of Excel users around the world. What if we could create a development language that converted those billions of Excel users into Power Platform developers? And as a result, PowerFX was invented, and we are on the precipice of some incredible changes in the way business applications are developed. And so this is why I see this as such a compelling and exciting technology. So if we retrofit PowerFX into this model that I've stolen from Thomas Malthus, we see that PowerFX has the potential to start closing this app gap between the apps we need and the developers we have by giving us billions of Excel users who can suddenly start to create apps and automations on the Power Platform because PowerFX works the exact same way as Excel, a tool that they've known and loved and used for years. Now, if we look at this through a slightly different lens, some of you may be familiar with the concept of the democratization of technology. This idea that when a new technology comes on the scene, it's the domain of a select few experts, and so we don't have a lot of it. And then over time, it passes from the experts into the hands of everyday people, and the growth takes off massively. And so I see us as being at this inflection point in business applications as PowerFX is poised to create a massive amount of developers who can create apps and automations on the Power Platform. Cast your mind back to the early days of the World Wide Web. So if you are over the age of 30, you probably remember a time before the internet was massively used. And in the early days of the World Wide Web, we didn't have a lot of websites. Creating them required quite a bit of technical skill and ability. You needed to know how to use HTML and other tools like that, which meant creating a website was time-consuming and expensive, and we didn't have a lot of them. However, over time, we have created technologies like WordPress and Wix and Power Pages, which means that anyone can pretty much go and create a website without having to write code. And I'm willing to wager that by the end of this session, you could easily go and register a domain and set up a basic site without having to go through a whole lot of effort. And as a result, we have lots of websites, and they're relatively easy to make. And so, again, I see us at this inflection point where PowerFX is poised to help us create lots and lots of business applications and automations that we need. All right, so hopefully I have successfully made the case that PowerFX is a big deal and that you should care about it. And so with that said, let's get into the demo. So what we'll do is we will go through modern commanding, formula columns in Dataverse, actions and low-code plugins, Copilot Studio, Power Pages, and the command line interface. So let me pop out of the presentation here and bring up my screen. All right, so firstly, let's take a look at modern commanding. So when you are working in model-driven apps, quite common requirement is a button to do something in the ribbon. Now, personally, I prefer to automate things as much as possible, but you will often find clients saying, we want a button to do X, Y, and Z. And so this has traditionally required pro devs to write some JavaScript to do this. But what Microsoft have done is they've given us the ability to drop commands into the ribbon in records in model-driven apps to go and do stuff and write PowerFX to do it. So let me show you what's going on behind the scenes for this, and then I'll show you how this actually works. All right, so let's come into our model-driven app. And to access this, you simply edit your model-driven app. You go to the table that you want to work with, and you'll see an option to edit the command bar, and you choose the form or the subgrid that you want to work with. And you can see from here, we can start to enter commands. Now this is the command that I've created. I call it the Sales Easy button. The idea being that as a salesperson, when I get a lead or a contact in the system, I need to go and do some research and then create some related records and mark that I've done it. And so what this button does is it's going to search LinkedIn for the name of the contact that I'm on. It's going to do the same for Google. And then what it's going to do is it is going to update my contact to show that I've done my sales research. It's going to create an opportunity in the system related to that record. And then it's going to give us a notification in the system, just because it's good practice to show people that we've clicked the button and that something's happened. Now, behind the scenes here, there's actually something called the component library. I won't open this now, but it's basically a Canvas app behind the scenes where all of this is compiled. And so that's basically where all your modern commands go. And we can do some other cool stuff. So we can set the visibility. So once the sales research complete is set to yes by this command, it goes and hides this in the ribbon so the user doesn't go and use it again. Now, if you had a situation where you needed to do something a little more complex, where PowerFX isn't going to get the job done for you, you can call JavaScript as well. So, however, I'm going to show you how this is working with PowerFX. Let me just pop out of the model-driven app editor, and we'll come back here to our contact. So once I click this button, it's going to pop open LinkedIn and Google searches for me. It's going to tick that we've done our sales research, and it's going to drop an opportunity here on the record. So let's go ahead and do that now. And so you can see it has searched Google for me. It has searched LinkedIn for me. And let's come back here to our record. So we've got a notification. One of the cool things you can do with these is you can set a timeout. And so they just auto dismiss so the user doesn't have to do that. So we'll see this drop away in the next 20 seconds. It's gone. And let's come here to our opportunity. So you can see that we have created an opportunity and we have ticked our research to complete, and the button has disappeared. Pretty cool. So that was all done with PowerFX expressions. If we want to get it back, we just tick this back to no. And once this saves, the button should read, there it is. And so that was all done with PowerFX Excel-like functions in our model-driven app. So that's modern commanding. Let's move on to calculated columns in Dataverse. So we've had the concept of calculated columns for quite some time in Dataverse. My personal experience is that the old designer is a little clunky to use, a little difficult to work with, but we have the ability now to create PowerFX functions on our columns. And so let me go and show you. I've got a table here in, go to which app do I want? This app. All right, so this is an app that I created for the World Cup to predict match winners based on Azure sentiment data. So I had Bing search combing Bing News for articles about the teams playing each other in last year's Rugby World Cup, and then running sentiment analysis to predict the winners. Long story short, you're better off just tossing a coin. It's about as accurate as that. But I did learn a lot and have a lot of fun along the way. And so this is one of the calculated columns that I use to take the sentiment analysis that I'd compiled from Bing News and Azure Sentiment to predict a winner. So let me go behind the scenes and I'll show you how this works. So when you are on a Dataverse table, you can create a column, and when you choose the type PowerFX, choose formula, you can start writing PowerFX formulas. Now there is a setting, it's buried deep in the Power Platform Admin Center, but when you tick it, you can get the option to have a little Copilot here, and so you can chat with that to get the expression for your formula column, which is really cool. But let me go and show you how this match prediction works. All right, so this is my formula, and what it does is I've basically nested a bunch of if statements to take the sentiment scores that have come back from Azure and predict a winner. So if both are equal to 0, it says predicting winner, which we saw in the app. If the sentiment score is for both sides is equal, but not 0, then it says the match is too close to call. Otherwise, it simply puts the name of the team who has the higher sentiment score. And so what's really cool about this is it can reference data here on the form in my app and use that to do some comparisons. So let me just go ahead and unlock these columns. I'll show you how this works. So let's put a 1 in here for the home side and save. And you can see that it is predicted that New Zealand will win. Now, if we put a 1 in here for the away side and we save again, it's going to say it's too close to call. And then if we set this higher, it says South Africa is going to win. And so this is a really cool way to put some tags and some dynamic information in Dataverse based on other data that's being compiled in Dataverse. So formula columns are pretty useful. You can do a lot of things with them. And so that's just one example of what they can do. Now they can reference data from related tables. So if I come back here to this parent fixture record, I can reference data from my associated tables. Now it only will do that in an end-to-one situation. So just be cognizant of that, but you can reference data from related tables to run your calculations. So it is pretty powerful. All right, so that's formula columns. Let's move on to actions in Dataverse and low-code plugins. Come back here to the Maker portal, and I've created a Canvas app to show us how this works. Now, what's really cool is we can access pro code plugins in our environment through PowerFX. So this is a great way to bridge the gap between pro devs in your organization and makers or functionals. So say, for example, we have something that is going to be reused in lots of different places. The pro coders could create that plugin, which the makers could then consume, or the makers need something to be run synchronously, which means it's outside of the scope of your traditional low-code tools, with the exception of low-code plugins. Your makers could create a plugin that could be called. And the way you do that is you add this table to your app called environment. And what this lets you do is it lets you access all of the plugins in your environment. So you can see all of the out-of-the-box plugins, including, start showing up, these are all just the out-of-the-box ones that come from Microsoft, but also some of my low-code ones are showing up here as well. And so that's how you can access actions in your apps via PowerFX. Now, I'm not a pro coder, so we're not going to go too deep into the traditional plugins, apart from the fact that they can be accessed. But Microsoft did release low-code plugins a year ago at the Build conference, and so those can be created via the Dataverse Accelerator app. So if you've got a this gets automatically added to any newly created environment. If you're working with an older environment, you can just get this from AppSource. Now, this allows you to create instant or automated plugins by simply writing PowerFX expressions, and what's happening behind the scenes is it compiles C# code. They've added the ability to monitor your plugins, and I've seen that they've also added some API monitoring to this as well, though it's not showing up in my environment currently. And so effectively, let's go in and take a look at one. Now, I've been having some issues with the Dataverse Accelerator app recently, so I want to be careful. I don't want to change anything and update the demo. I've had some issues creating and editing plugins lately. But effectively, this is my plugin. It goes off and it calls an API to get some random trivia. And so what it's going to do is I am able to use my connections in the Power Platform Maker portal to go ahead and access and work with external data from Dataverse. Now this is pretty cool because in your traditional plugins, you actually have to go create connection strings and work with client secrets and things like that. Whereas in low-code plugins, you don't have to do that. But let's go back here to our Canvas app and let's see this in action. So let's click on Get Trivia. And you can see it's gone and given us a trivia question or trivia fact. Now, you might be saying, that's great, Nathan, but I don't need a plugin to do that in a Canvas app. I can just use a connection. And the key phrase here would be synchronous. So when you need synchronous business logic, this is the tool to use. Now I'll show you another plugin. So I've got a plugin here that will create a sales invoice based on a sales order. So this is a row in Dataverse. Let's come back here to my model-driven app, and we'll go to my sales order. And what it's going to do when I run it is it's going to drop an invoice here related to the order. So come back here to this, and we'll call. Actually, let me show you the plugin real quick, just to show you what it's doing. And so I've basically got a collect statement here, which is how you create rows in Dataverse and low-code plugins, and it's just going to create this. Now I've got some with expressions wrapped around it. Keith Atherton, who's another MVP, and I were doing some experiments earlier this year trying to monitor the time that it takes to execute, and so that's why I've got some of that extra logic in there. But let's go ahead and run this. Hold the Alt key down. We can see that that's running in the background, and we'll come here back to our sales order. Quick refresh, and you can see that it's created that for us via the plugin. So that's PowerFX working with actions in Dataverse. Now you can also run automated plugins, which think Power Automate. They're triggered when a Dataverse event happens, or create and update, something like that. I don't have any of these working at the moment, so I can't show you any of those. But that's actions in Dataverse. All right. So we've covered off modern commanding, Dataverse formula columns, and actions. Let's move on to Copilot Studio. So what I've done here in Copilot is I've created an action. Now these are different from low-code plugins and custom actions. This is a Copilot action, and it's simply going to get the weather. But what I can do in the response is I can use PowerFX to take the data that's gone into the input to the Copilot chat and the output from this action to craft a response for the user and give a bit of personality to the bot. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and check the weather, and the bot will let us know whether or not we need a sweater based on the temperature. Let's go ahead and ask it this. This will take a second or two to run here. All right, so let me put in my location. So you can see it's a chilly day here in Auckland. We will need a sweater, as it is winter here in the Southern Hemisphere. But let's try a Northern Hemisphere location. So let's check the weather again. Give it a second here to go, and let's check the weather in Paris. So we can see it is a balmy day in Paris. It's 22 degrees and we won't need a sweater. And so you can see that I'm using PowerFX here, taking inputs from my location and outputs from the responses in terms of the weather conditions, the temperature. And then I'm able to use this PowerFX if expression to say, if the temperature is above 18 degrees, you won't need a sweater, otherwise you will. So that's PowerFX in Copilot Studio. All right, let's move on to Power Pages. This is the newest addition to the PowerFX family in the Power Platform. This was just announced at Build a few short weeks ago. And now I am not a Power Pages guru by any stretch of the imagination, but I've been playing around with this, and this is pretty cool. And so what I can do is I can start using PowerFX to interact with Dataverse and do some different things. So for example, I'm just doing a simple count rows, and it says that there are 13 accounts. Now let's change this up to contacts, and change this to contacts, and save. And you can see that it's changed that dynamically for us based on this PowerFX expression. So that's pretty cool. We can also, I've done just a little fizz buzz here to say if the count rows is greater than or equal to 100, do a fizz, otherwise do a buzz. So if I'm looking at accounts, we have 13 accounts, so we get a buzz. Let's change this to contacts and save, and it changes to fizz. So a little fizz buzz with PowerFX and Power Pages. But you can see that we can start to dynamically change some information in Power Pages that renders on the portals that we create for people to access. Now, this is pretty cool because Power Pages is simultaneously one of the most low-code that becomes pro-code parts of the Power Platform. You can, with a few clicks, create a portal. However, what tends to happen in practice is we end up doing quite a bit of customization with Liquid, with JavaScript, with jQuery. And what PowerFX allows us to do is start to replace some of that JavaScript and jQuery that is often required. So portals is starting to become a bit more low code with some of the customization we can do, which is really cool. All right, just conscious of the time here, the last thing I'll take you through is the command line interface. Now this is another preview feature, but what it lets us do is it lets us start interacting with Dataverse with PowerFX through the command line in VS Code. And so what you do is you you connect to your Power Platform environment and then run PowerFX REPL. And what this does is it lets you start typing PowerFX commands. So if we say count rows and contacts, you can see it does that. Or we can say look up contacts, last name in rows, and it's returned my record, including the GUID. So pretty cool. We can even modify data in here. We can modify data, create data, all kinds of things. So let me just do a quick collect, and let's do accounts, and we'll say name. And so this is going to go away. It's going to create a row in Dataverse. And let's pop back into our environment here. And you can see that it's gone and created that account for us via the command line interface. Now, what's really cool about this is there is another PowerFX command called PowerFX run, which means you can create just change the view here to wrap, is you can create some really complex PowerFX expressions to run when you do things like, say, ALM. You can have a PowerFX command file run and create or modify data in your environment. So it is really, really cool. All right, so we have gone through quite a lot. we have, just go ahead and reshare the presentation here. All right, so we have gone through modern commanding, Dataverse formula columns, actions, Copilot Studio, Power Pages, and the CLI. Now we've done a pretty quick whip through these as PowerFX has grown considerably in the last year. But if any of you want to do a deep dive on any of these anytime, let me know. I'm happy to set that up. So just some quick stuff to keep in mind when you're using these. So Canvas apps are GA. PowerFX is your default option. Model-driven apps, custom pages, again, GA. Modern commanding, this is GA. It replaces legacy commands. Pretty much, this is your default option unless for some reason you can't meet your requirement with modern commands. Formula columns, these are quite capable. The only things they don't do is currency and rollups. Now, this may have changed. I haven't looked at this for a couple of months, but last I checked, they didn't support currency or rollups. I know this is on the cards, so do keep checking that often. I find them less clunky to configure, and they do have a lot more capability via PowerFX. Dataverse actions, so you can use pro-code plugins with PowerFX today. Low-code plugins are still in preview, but this bridges the gap between your makers and your pro-code devs. Copilot Studio is still in preview, but it lets you add personality and flair to your copilots. Power Pages still in preview, but again, it reduces the requirement to create JavaScript and jQuery in Power Pages, as you can now use PowerFX. The CLI is still in preview as well, but it lets you do CRUDs in Dataverse from VS Code, which is really cool. Lastly, low-code plugins. Again, this is still in preview, but this means that makers and functionals can now create synchronous automation with these PowerFX commands. And Power Automate Desktop, still in preview. This is an area I'm not well versed in, so we haven't touched on it today. All right, what does this mean for me? Well, it depends. So if you are a pro dev, PowerFX frees you to solve harder, more complex challenges that require code. Makers are now empowered to solve their business challenges with apps and automations that are created via PowerFX. And if you are a consultant or a functional, you need to start understanding when to harness PowerFX versus pro code. So we need to start thinking about when it makes sense to use PowerFX, when pro code is more maintainable. So these are the types of thought patterns and conversations we need to be having as we architect these solutions. And that's brought us to the end of our time together. So hopefully I've made the case that we are at an inflection point, that PowerFX is poised to create billions of developers around the world to close this gap between developers we have and software that we need by freeing pro devs up to solve complex challenges, giving functionals a choice, and empowering makers to solve their challenges. And to come full circle as to our start, where flight was kind of ignored when it was first invented, I believe this is a bigger deal than generative AI. It's easy to see how PowerFX can be lost in the shuffle. It's not as sexy as ChatGPT and Copilots. However, it is a massive deal, and I believe that in time this will be seen as a huge deal. So thank you all so much for your time and your attention, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much. It was super cool things here. So I gained a lot of things here today from the PowerFX and your presentation. I think, I'm sure that our attendees also get a lot of gain, from your presentation today. So I know that there are several advantages of using the PowerFX. So one of them is it's similar to the Excel formula. So it's pretty easy, for the user that has background, working with the Excel formula. So it's uh, similar to the Excel formula. And I think another things is that another advantage is that it can be executed instantly, without the need to compile, of the code. So you get, the response of the code instantly. So yeah, it's a good things here. So I have a question here. So you demonstrate the Microsoft Dataverse Accelerator app. So how we can get, or how users can get access, to this? Is this in the preview version, or is it accessible to the public users or not? It's not.
Yeah, the Dataverse Accelerator app. So that is in your environment. If you create a new environment, that will be dropped in there by default. In terms of controlling access to it, that's a good question. I haven't looked into it. So in my personal dev environment, I'm a global admin, so I see everything.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't played around with controlling access to it. I am pretty sure you could do that via security role, but I'd need to confirm it. But that is a very good question.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So I'm not seeing any question here. We have some comments, but there is no question here. So okay, so we can wrap up our today's session. Thank you, Nathan, for your great presentation.
Thanks so much, Arash. Pleasure.
Hopefully see you again in our upcoming events with another great topic and another great presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, to join us today, and hope you have a great day and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.